How many servers and services do you have that nobody dares to touch? If you cannot answer, or you actually know the answer, maybe it's time to break that glass ceiling that limits the capabilities of your business. Keep on watching my video, where I'll show you how I tackle those situations and how I deal with snowflakes. And I will try to show you also the importance of this process and why you should start immediately. Let's start with a definition of the problem. What is actually a snowflake? Well, it is a server or an application whose configuration or maintenance plan drifted away so much that nobody actually knows how to deal with it anymore. Frankly speaking, that means nobody has any recipe for that machine or that application anymore, and all the things typically are very much interconnected. So whatever you're touching most likely will cause an avalanche effect, and yes, a disaster after a disaster is about to happen. One of the classical examples of a snowflake is also a server, for example, that has been maintained by a worker who has retired. And yes, it's been there forever, it's been doing something, and it's very important. And yes, nobody can maintain it anymore. And there comes the funny saying in IT: if it works, don't touch it, don't touch it. Well, basically, that's exactly the opposite what you should do with snowflakes. You should absolutely touch them, but you should have a plan and you should know what you're doing. But this is exactly what I'm going to show in a moment. There is one more sneaky aspect when it comes to snowflakes. Basically, yes, it is all about not touching them as long as they work. But the thing is, this is very close to something I've been covering in a different video about death by 1,000 cuts. This is something that is defined as the creeping normality. So these things with the snowflake, they usually happen also slowly over time. And you are kind of getting used to the bad situation, and you at some point stop noticing that it's actually going very bad. This is why it's so important to not allow having those snowflakes in the first place. So let's get on to the plan. How to do this? Well, just like with procrastination, you simply have to act. So the most important thing is to decide that yes, we are dealing with the problem and we are dealing with it right away.
What I've just said might be as obvious as the cat eating the leftovers. This is exactly the danger of the situation. It looks like it's not a threat, but in reality, that's just a facade.
Allowing this to run for a longer period of time means that you're actually getting closer to a technological debt. And what do you have in technological debt? You have the compound interest, which means the longer you wait with repairing it, the more it's going to cost you to repay it. Okay, so the first point might be a little bit boring, but the whole idea is try to get an expert, or at least a person that really knows a lot about the thing you are dealing with. By getting an external expert, you're actually securing a lot of wins. The first one is the expert is very often unbiased and is not soaked in the politics that runs in your company. That means those people have the ability to kind of like look from the outside on the processes in your company and things that are happening, and most likely they will help you discover much more, which will prevent creating further snowflakes in the future. Because very often they have a lot of experience, they will be able to actually discover all of that much quicker, and they will discover much more probably than your in-house team. Of course, this is a very convenient situation for you, because that means you are in control, because you will have the list, you will know exactly what is happening, and then you can decide how to deal with it, and with some extra input, in which order. In case you don't have an expert, or you would like to start doing things on your own, then the first thing that I usually do is to try to replicate the environment. You know, these days we have virtual machines, we have fantastic software to be able to actually replicate full operating systems and simulate everything. By doing that, you're actually mitigating a lot of risk, because you actually get the ability to work with the snowflake in an isolated environment without the risk of breaking anything. And if you're afraid that some of the communication is going to leave it, then of course you can firewall it, because exactly, in the virtual world, you can replicate almost everything. So you can build also complex network configurations and everything, and you can filter out the traffic in the way you want it. And what happens when you remove the risk? Well, then your team becomes much more confident, because they will be able to play with the machine in an isolated environment. Another thing which I usually add, which I bring from the box of tricks that is called DevOps, that's monitoring. By monitoring, not only the vitals of the machine, but also some of the business processes. Try to monitor things across different domains. You get actually a very good overview, and you have the ability to actually anticipate sometimes some problems before they happen, because you will see that, when we have no bookings, then probably something is wrong with something else, and then we should investigate it. By establishing monitoring of the Snowflake that you're about to disassemble, this will help you, of course, in the analysis of that machine or application, and later on, when you have to put it back into production, it will, of course, help you monitor it for a longer period of time, and I would say in this case forever. What is very important is that you don't forget that you should actually monitor it across the different domains. So not only focus on the machine vitals. Okay, something was living in those bushes. You don't have to focus. You shouldn't focus only on the machine vitals or the application vitals, but also on the business aspect of your company. Because by actually correlating those two, you will be very often able to anticipate problems before they occur. So the business, and them as long, the big backups. I've heard so many times that people have stellar backups and everything is fine, everything is working. And then comes the disaster day and they have something they cannot restore, or whatever they restore, it's actually not everything. Something is wrong, there is missing data and so on. This is why it's important to make sure and review your backup procedure before you start working with the Snowflake, because you would like to have a backup plan. And I'm not talking only about plan A, plan B, you also want to have plan C. And do you know what really annoys me about backups? Everybody is saying that yes, you should take your backups and you should make sure that you verify them. But the question is, how do you verify them in an efficient manner? Well, in case of web applications, it's relatively easy, because you could use Docker, you could use virtual machines to make sure that you can re-establish the environment. In terms of databases, you can just take dumps and make sure they are going to be used in staging environments. And of course, you just have to remember to put some GDPR cleaning before you actually do this. So there's a lot of options on how to do this. And I think when you actually decompose your Snowflake and you review your backup procedure, this is also a good moment to make sure that this is going to enter your verification routine, because in the future this will really secure your business should something bad happen. The next step is composed of multiple steps, and some of them might be actually a little bit complex. And here I'm talking about things like investigate the ability of using software-defined architecture. Check whether you're actually able to introduce zero downtime deployments, and also check if you can introduce things like, for example, smooth rollbacks in your database. Okay, so what is software-defined architecture? You define your architecture, your servers, how they are going to be built, how they're going to be configured in software. There's plenty of tools that make it possible in a very short time, and they often use declarative languages, which means you are not writing the recipe on how this should be done, but what should be the effect. I recommend that you take a look on things like, for example, SaltStack, Puppet, Chef, Ansible. I mean, there's really a lot of them. The good thing is that they allow you actually to provision machines both in the cloud and the so-called bare metal. So if you're running your own servers, this should not be a problem at all. If you ask me what I'm using, well, I'm a big fan of SaltStack, but as I'm saying always, use the best tool for the job. What do you gain when you introduce SDA? Well, first of all, you introduce speed and stability, because you can very quickly re-establish your environment, and stability because yes, you have a recipe, so those servers are no longer going to be made manually, so you remove all those human errors. So for example, in some of the servers that my customers have, some of them can be replicated and created from scratch under 2 minutes. Some of them, they require a lot of installation, around 10 minutes. So you see, this is actually great. You have a fully ready machine within 10 minutes and you don't have to think about almost anything. Okay, so what about the zero downtime deployments? Zero downtime deployments allow you to put a new version of your web application online. And this happens, yes, with zero downtime. So basically, inside, what is going on is that you usually have a symbolic link. When you're ready, the whole application is built. The last bit of the process is just changing the symbolic link, and it's changing the link from the current, so the working release, to one of those that was just prepared. Of course, this gets a little bit more complicated when we talk about SPAs or, for example, server-side rendered applications. But it's still possible because there is a lot of strategies and ways in which you can actually provide either the old code to the customer or actually trigger a full reload and make sure that the customer has the latest JavaScript chunks. If you ask me, I would say that the zero downtime deployment is one of the cornerstones of actually being confident when it comes to releasing your new software, especially in the web realm. It's really increasing your uptime, and in case you have a problem, you can simply roll back to the previous working version. Okay, so you're gonna say, Michael, it's so easy to say that yes, you can then just roll back if that release is not working. But how about the database migrations that have been just run? I cannot just roll back to the previous version of the application. Well, if you remember in the beginning, I also said something about rollback strategies. There is actually a way in which you can maintain your database schema and your tables and data so that the changes that you perform, they're actually not destructive. And by not destructive, I'm saying you don't modify your things in place. You only actually make additive changes. And this is again a trick from the DevOps magical box, if I could call it like this. And believe me, this works fantastically. Well, for example, normally you would change a value in a column in place. In this case, you create a new column and you just copy the value to the new column that you just created. If something goes wrong when you make a rollback, well, the new application knows the new column, the old application knows the old column. No issues at all. Of course, just like in the real life, and you can see the trail which is in front of me, it will happen that you'll reach a situation when this is actually not possible and you will be forced to perform some in-place changes. And yes, there is always an exception from the rule. And in such situations, yes, you have to do this and then you actually have the downtime, but then you really have to have it in order to make sure that you have consistent database, that everything is running and you can test it and so on. So yes, it is not a recipe for 100% zero downtime deployments, but it can really take 99% of them and it will really make the whole release process much smoother and it will increase the confidence of your team dramatically. So these are the points I'm using in order to transform snowflakes into working machines. Of course, there is a lot more work involved as you're actually doing those things, but yes, you have a very simple plan that allows you to actually do those things in a secure manner. I have also some honorable mentions, things that you should take a look at. You see, the first one is a rather obvious one, documentation. This is something that very often is neglected or put aside. But the thing is, all you really need to have is just a markdown file where you're going to document everything. And I know there is usually a lot of discussion, should we use this and that product for documentation? In the simplest case, you just need a Git repository and knowledge of Markdown, which is pretty much something that almost every programmer knows. And this is enough to start. So have a documentation that is actually readable and that is usable. This will significantly help you in the future to avoid the snowflake trap again. There is one more honorable mention. Do you remember the case about the employee that was the only one that knew something about the server and application, and that employee was of course retired? This is it. When you are doing it, once again now, make sure that you actually get some knowledge transfer in place. Knowledge transfer, it's one thing, but also think about training, because having training in place, and especially training that is repeated, for example, every 3-4 weeks. This is something that will make sure that this knowledge is secure and that people can actually use it and apply it when needed. Dealing with the snowflake immediately has a lot of advantages. One of them is what I said in the beginning, technological debt. It has exactly the same thing, which is the compound interest. The longer you wait, the more you have to pay. So the question is now, are there any twists when it comes to removing the snowflakes? Well, again, like you can see my trail right now, there are some twists. And one of the twists is that sometimes you just don't want to remove the the snowflake, you actually would like to strangle it. And I made actually a very good video about the strangling pattern, and probably there's going to be a card now up displayed. I recommend watching this video if you would like to really get to know how it works and how it can be used. But how can you use it actually in a snowflake scenario? One of the best tools I've been using for strangling snowflakes was actually Nginx. Usually I had two reasons to put Nginx in front of a snowflake. First one is security and life support. I needed, for example, SSL termination, web application firewall, because the thing that was behind, well, yes, it was old and it was impossible to upgrade it. And sometimes you just want to have a reverse proxy that is blocking all the unauthorized traffic. The second case is actually the true strangling operation, which means that I'm using actually Nginx and I'm routing all the traffic through that reverse proxy in front of it. And then bit by bit, I'm replacing the functionality of the old system with the new system. And of course, since I have Nginx in front of it, I can easily define new routes to go either to the old machine, the snowflake, or the new machine, which is slowly strangling or replacing the functionality of the one we want to get rid of. This list is far from complete, but it has enough on its own to actually give your team enough work so that they can regain the confidence when working with those systems. And one of the other important things you're going to get back here is, of course, the speed at which they're going to be able to, for example, deliver new features. And of course, you slash a lot of the risk that was previously connected with your company and the fact that you had machines that nobody could replace or nobody knew how they work. For most of the people, this type of work is neither fun nor enjoyable. But in a fun way, this is actually something I've been doing in the past many years. So this is actually something I enjoy doing. So if you have some snowflakes that you would like to melt, just reach out. The place that I'm filming today is called Barranco del Infierno, which means the Hell's Ravine, and the views are absolutely fantastic and stunning. The only problem is it's actually very hot in here. Just like you would expect, it's going to be hot in hell. Similar situation is when you're working with your snowflakes. You are inside of a Hell's Ravine. It's very hot inside, and if you make a mistake, you don't have enough water, or something else happens, or as you noticed on the trail, I had weird things in the bushes, and I've met some of those funny plants that when I touched them, yeah, the blood came out of my skin. So this is it, you know, this is like with the snowflakes. Whatever you're gonna touch, it's gonna make a wound, just like you have with 1,000 cuts. And at some point, you're gonna get to the 1,000 cuts, and yes, that's when things are gonna go really bad. Just like it went for me, because I have no idea where I am. So, don't procrastinate, get on with it. Best of luck with melting your own snowflakes. And as I said, if you need some help, just reach out.